The pond looks perfect. Clear water, good cover, no wind, fish showing at the surface early in the morning. You set up on the bank, make your first cast, and within 10 minutes you have a bite. Then another. Then it stops. You stay for 3 more hours, try different baits, move down the bank, come back to the original spot. Nothing. The pond did not run out of fish between that third bite and the rest of the morning. The fish are still there, but something changed the moment they decided you were not worth eating around anymore. This is not a bad day or a slow bite. This is accumulated fishing pressure, and it builds faster than most anglers realize. Not over weeks, but sometimes within a single 2-hour session. Old pond anglers understood this and managed around it. The pond that looks perfect and produces nothing is almost never empty. It is educated. Here is the first sign that a pond is carrying pressure, and you can read it before you make a single cast. Watch the surface for 2 or 3 minutes before you do anything. In an unpressured pond, bluegill and panfish move freely in the shallows, feeding casually, surfacing for insects, holding in open water near the bank. In a pressured pond, the same fish are present, but their behavior is compressed. They hold tighter to cover. They do not surface feed in open water. They sit deeper in the shade rather than working the edges. This behavioral compression is the pond telling you, before your line ever hits the water, that the fish know this bank, they know this routine, and they are already on guard. Read the surface before you cast. It tells you everything about what is happening below it. Fishing pressure is not simply the number of fish caught. It is the cumulative effect of repeated exposure to hooks, lines, splashes, footsteps, and bait presentations that fish have learned to associate with danger. Bluegill and other panfish have a documented capacity to associate specific stimuli with negative outcomes. And in a small, enclosed pond, where the same fish population experiences the same angling routine repeatedly, that association builds faster than most anglers expect. The fish do not leave the pond. They adjust. They change when they feed, where they hold, how long they commit to a bait, and how close to the bank they are willing to move. Pressure does not empty a pond, it educates it. The speed at which panfish adjust to pressure is one of the least discussed aspects of small pond fishing, and it is the reason a pond that produced well on Tuesday can feel completely different by Saturday. Studies on bluegill behavior under repeated angling pressure show measurable changes in feeding behavior within as few as 3 to 5 exposures to a given presentation. The fish do not need to be caught to learn. They need only to observe the hook set and escape of another fish near them, or to approach a bait and detect the line or the hook. In a small pond with limited territory and a stable population, this learning spreads through the school. What one fish avoids, the others begin to avoid as well. Here is how a pond accumulates pressure across a season. Early spring, the fish are naive, feeding aggressively after winter, responding to almost any reasonable presentation. As the season progresses and anglers visit regularly, bite windows that once ran from dawn until mid-morning begin compressing to the first 30 minutes of light. Fish that once held in 2 feet of water along the bank begin defaulting to 5 or 6 feet except in darkness. Presentations that once drew strikes immediately begin requiring longer dwell times, and then stop drawing strikes entirely. No single fishing trip caused this. The accumulation did. And the pond that looks perfect and fishes poorly in midsummer is almost always a pond that has absorbed a full season of unmanaged pressure. The pond is not empty. It is not dead. The fish you could not catch this morning were within 30 feet of where you were standing. What changed is not their location, but their willingness. And willingness in a pressured fish is not fixed. It recovers. Understanding what causes it to shut down is the first step. Understanding how to restore it is the second. The first sign of active pressure is a shift in when the bite occurs. A pond that normally produces bites within the first few minutes begins requiring longer wait times. Fish that struck within seconds of a bait settling now wait 30 seconds, sometimes a minute, before committing. If your first 5 minutes used to produce bites and now it takes 20, the pond is carrying pressure. The second sign is a shortened strike window once a fish does commit. In an unpressured pond, a bluegill holds the bait for 2 to 4 seconds. In a pressured pond, the same fish picks it up, detects the hook or the line, and drops it within half a second. The bite feels like a tap. You strike and find nothing. The fish evaluated the bait faster because it has learned to do so. The third sign is outright refusal of presentations that previously worked. Fish approach the bait, visibly inspect it, and turn away without striking. This is a direct signal that the fish have seen that specific combination of hook size, line weight, and presentation enough times to identify it as a threat rather than food. Old pond anglers called this a pond going wise to a bait, and their response was never to fish harder with the same setup. It was to change something fundamental. The fourth sign is a depth shift. As pressure accumulates across a season, shallow feeding zones that produce fish in spring become progressively less productive during daylight hours. The fish that held in 2 to 3 feet in April default to 5 or 6 feet by July, moving shallow only in very low light. This is pressure-driven, not simply temperature-driven. Old pond anglers who fished the same water across multiple seasons developed rotation systems that have almost entirely disappeared. The system was simple, a mental map of the pond divided into sections. Each fished once and lightly, 3 to 5 casts, never more, then left completely alone for the rest of the session. The next visit began at a different section. The original section was not returned to for at least a full week. The goal was never to maximize catch in any single visit. The goal was to keep each section perpetually slightly naive, never educated enough to be fully unresponsive, never pressured hard enough to compress behavior across the entire water. How long a pond needs to recover depends on how hard it was fished. Light pressure, 1 or 2 anglers for an hour, typically allows recovery within 2 to 4 days. Moderate pressure, multiple anglers, several hours, may require a full week. Heavy pressure, repeated visits in a short window across the whole pond, can suppress behavior for 2 weeks or more in a small water. Old anglers who tracked this empirically noted that a pond fished hard on Saturday and left entirely alone until the following Saturday typically fished comparably to a lightly pressured pond. The fish reset. The window reopened. Before you change your bait, change your presentation. The first fix for a pressured pond is the one most anglers skip past, altering something fundamental about how the bait enters and moves through the water before switching to a different bait entirely. Lighter line reduces the visible signal fish have learned to detect. A smaller hook reduces the stiffness they feel when they close their mouth. A slower, more natural retrieve gives the bait a movement pattern that differs from what the fish have cataloged as dangerous. In many cases, the same bait that failed to draw strikes in its standard presentation will produce bites when delivered on lighter terminal tackle with a different entry angle. After 2 missed bites or 2 refusals at any spot, rotate away and do not return more than once in the same session. In a pressured pond, continuing to cast to the same fish after they have already rejected the bait twice does not increase your chances, it accelerates their education. Move at least 30 to 40 feet along the bank. Fish a fresh section for 10 to 15 minutes, and return only once. Old anglers treated a 2 refusal threshold as an absolute rule, not a guideline. The fish that refuse twice are more educated than they were before you arrived. Fishing them a 3rd time is not catching them. It is training them. Every small pond has zones that receive significantly less fishing pressure than others, not because the fish are not there, but because the bank access is difficult, the casting angle is awkward, or the spot simply does not look productive. These untouched zones are where the least educated fish in the pond are holding. Old pond anglers identified these areas and protected them deliberately, fishing them only occasionally and never hard. An overgrown bank corner, a section reachable only by a long cast from an uncomfortable position, the shallow end near the inlet. These spots hold fish in a pressured pond precisely because no one has bothered to educate them yet. Find the inconvenient spots. That is where the willing fish are. The final fix is reducing pressure on the first cast of every session, not just after the fish have already shown signs of pressure. The first cast into any section of a pressured pond is the highest value cast you will make all session. The fish at that moment are in their least educated state. A hard overhead cast that splashes loudly, a heavy sinker, a bait that swings unnaturally. All of these consume part of that first cast advantage before the hook is even near a fish. Deliver the first cast as softly and naturally as possible, from as far back from the bank as the cast allows, using the lightest terminal tackle that will reach the target. That single adjustment produces more first cast bites in pressured water than any bait change. When a pond is fished with rotation, with rest, and with varied presentation, the change in behavior is measurable within a single season. Bite windows that compress to 15 minutes begin extending back toward an hour. Fish that defaulted to 6 feet return to working the shallows in the morning. Presentations that produced refusals begin drawing strikes again. The pond did not become stocked with new fish. The existing fish simply returned to a lower state of education because the pressure that elevated it was removed. This is what old pond anglers called keeping a pond honest, not catching fewer fish, but catching them in a way that preserved the pond's productivity across the whole season, rather than concentrating it in the first few visits. The checklist for a pressured pond. Before your first cast, watch the surface for 2 minutes and read the behavioral compression. If fish are holding tight to cover and not surfacing, the pond is already carrying pressure. Adjust before you begin. First cast. Soft entry, light terminal tackle, from further back than feels necessary. After 2 refusals or 2 missed bites at any spot, rotate away. Do not return more than once in the same session. Presentation before bait. Change line weight, hook size, and entry angle before switching bait. Find the inconvenient access points and protect them. Those are your reset zones for pressured sessions. Rest the pond. At least 1 full week between moderate pressure sessions, 2 weeks after a hard session. The pond that looks perfect and fishes poorly is almost never empty. It is educated. And education in a fish is reversible if you give it the time and the reason to forget. Subscribe to Traditional Angling for more field-based fishing knowledge.